Chapter 293. Atlantis Speak and Count. Tuesday, July 23, 1996. Xylexylenda. I've got some. Tuparastu charged into the house with the bag of goodies in his hand. He'd gotten a few Muggle artifacts from the Inuit before. Who hadn't? However, these looked much different, and for the most part much more sophisticated. Officially, all property belonged to the nation, and citizens had to petition the government to borrow them. The demand for the new Muggle objects, however, was so great that the government had had to hold a lottery. Each ticket cost 10 galleons, and people would be allowed to win more than once. In theory, the government had the right to take personal property by eminent domain. In this case, however, the citizens told that it wouldn't happen unless a particular object was important enough to be deemed an issue of national security. In that case, the citizen would have to do some experiments to see how exactly the object worked before turning it over to the government. The citizen would then be compensated by getting first dibs on the next set of Muggle artifacts. There was a stampede down the staircase as Tupa's wife and 3 children rushed into the living room to see the goodies. Myra, his wife, was barely able to restrain the 6-year-old from reaching into the bag and grabbing something which, for all she knew, could be dangerous. The thought made her turn to her husband. "Tupa, are any of these objects actually dangerous? You don't have any experience with this stuff." Tupa shook his head. "I doubt it, honey. None of the Inuit artifacts were." "I know that. However, this stuff isn't Inuit, and from what I've read it's far more sophisticated and has many different uses." "I agree. That's why I've decided that the 2 of us will work with them first, and unless it's obvious that they're safe, we're going to hold on to them or exchange them." This, of course, prompted an uproar from the children. It took the parents a good 5 minutes to stop the crying and screaming. The threat that finally did it was simple. If you don't shut up, no one gets any presents. With the kids silenced at last, Tupa reached into the bag and came out with a small box. He opened the box to reveal a small purple cylinder which appeared to be encased in glass. It looked like a candle, and it had unusual writing on it, of which Tupa could translate only one word: candle. The picture also showed images of lemons and flowers. Myra scratched his head. "Looks like a candle to me, complete with the wick. What's so special about that?" Tupa chuckled. "Unless I miss my guess, this candle is supposed to smell like lemons or flowers when it's burned. They actually need to have material objects to create these smells. Isn't that funny?" The kids all laughed at that and told him to light the candle. Making them promise to not touch, he lit the candle and sat back. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Eventually, a faint whiff of lemon and lavender became noticeable. It was something a 5th-year wizard could have done while he was half asleep. Nida, the 9-year-old, claimed that her dolls could do better than that, and Tupa couldn't argue with that. The second object was larger than the candle and seemed to come in 2 pieces. There was a large white box with a black square on the top and a bunch of buttons with the digits 09 on the bottom. There were also 2 buttons labeled an asterisk. In the middle of the device was a set of white buttons with labels like flash and mute. At the very top was an odd sequence of characters, at and T. Tupa didn't recognize the 3rd character at all. How was that pronounced? There appeared to be a cable attached to the left side of the box. The other end of the cable was attached to a white object about a foot long, and when Tupa turned the device upside down, the object fell out and began hanging from the cable. The 6-year-old looked at the object curiously, then daringly put the part that had fallen out on her head. "Look, Mom, I've got a headband." Myra suddenly had a flash of insight. "Tupa, I think I know what this is. This is a really good pickup if we know how to get it to work." Tupa's eyebrows shot up. "Really? What do you think it is?" Myra pointed at the display. "Those buttons with the numbers seem to be important, given their location on the device. My guess is that the device teaches Muggle children how to count. I bet that if someone pushes the button, the little black box on top speaks the number in words." Tupa grunted. That's possible, but what's this extra equipment for? I have no idea what Yura's headband is supposed to be. Yura, who was quite bright for her age, had an idea. I think I know, Dad. You see all those little twists on the side of the rope connecting my headband and the box? I bet that you can add or remove twists from it. The thing plays a game as well. If you enter the number of twists on the buttons, you'll get a message if you got it right. That's what those other buttons like asterisk and hash are for. Myra looked at the other words on the object. The words were written in the Gulliver alphabet, but the language had changed drastically from the way it had been when Gulliver had brought it to Zelenda. Memory, volume, hold, program. Tupa noted. Makes sense. There are multiple programs and games, so that's what the program button is for. Memory is another game, obviously. Volume controls how loud the device speaks. I'm not sure what hold is. Suddenly it hit him. Merlin's beard, Myra. I think I've heard of this device before. Someone I know managed to get one of these which supposedly taught the Muggle children to spell. The speak-and spell. Yup, I bet this is a speak-and count. This could be useful if we could adapt it for our use. Once we do that, we may be able to help Vad with his speak-and spell. Myra smiled. Not a bad idea, Tupa. In fact, if you take a closer look at the buttons, you'll see that most of them have letters on them. Oddly enough, there's no Q, Thorn, or Z. I bet you can learn letters with it too. That's quite possible, Myra. Perhaps this is an advanced speak-and spell where you can learn both numbers and letters. But why is there no Q, Thorn, or Z? Muggles have no Q or Z in their world. Tupa grinned. Easy. The Americans no longer use those letters. Q became K and Z became S or something like that. It's not like those letters were used often. Thorn probably turned into D, T, or Y. Myra nodded and had one final question. How do we turn it on? Tupa scratched his head. ERUM. Not knowing how on earth the machine worked, he reached into the bag for the last object. It was a small card the size of a chocolate frog card. However, the picture wasn't dynamic. The name at the bottom said Mark Maguire. It showed an extremely muscular man with what appeared to be a large stick in his hand. He appeared to be wearing a uniform of some sort and was standing in front of a squatting man with a mask. Myra looked at the card in puzzlement. Mark Maguire, who's he? Tupa shrugged. I don't know. He must be an important person, however, to get something like a chocolate frog card. He turned the card over and looked at the back. The back had a lot of numbers and codes on it which looked meaningless to him. 3B, RBI, HR, and so forth. Some of the numbers under the HR column were highlighted. Myra looked at the card curiously. I wonder if he's the President of the United States. Tupa shook his head. No, Myra. I know the President of the United States is named Bill Clinton. Then who's this guy? Tupa thought for a moment. Vice President. No, wait. Head of the army. Look at the way he's holding that stick. It looks like he's going to smash in Voldemort's head. Combine that with the fact that the person behind him looks armored and is wearing a mask. Head of the army. I'm sure of it. Chapter 294. Dumbledore's Army Deployed. Wednesday, July 24, 1996, Black Tower Hogsmeade United Kingdom Nicholas Flamel had been very persuasive, and he had eventually convinced Dagher that the stone had to be retaken. What he hadn't expected, however, was the former Saudi minister's reaction. With the 1st Division of the Wizards Standing Army still on station in the DMZ, the Grand Mugwump had decided to deploy the 2nd Division all around the world, working together to track down Hendrickson and hopefully come away with the stone. These individuals would assist the British Auras and various American agents whenever necessary. In most cases, the deployment of the 2nd Division would have just gotten a few shrugs, accompanied by remarks that Atlantis was trying to recapture the stone. In Britain, however, the reactions were much stronger for one reason, and one reason alone. This was because prior to Judgment Day, the 2nd Division had been known by another, more informal name, Dumbledore's army. Dumbledore had to go with them, of course. Not surprisingly, the former Grand Mugwump was going to be serving as the commander-in-chief of the 2nd Division. This put Snape back in the headmaster's tower and got Flamel into a shouting match with Slughorn about returning to Hogwarts. Not surprisingly, Slughorn had gotten fed up with all of this coming and going, not to mention the work in Korea, and had decided that he was staying retired for good. With Slughorn out of the picture, the position of Potions Master was open. After a brief discussion, they had offered it to Hugh. Flamel and Hugh had both balked at this, stating that Hugh was trained as an alchemist and not as a potioneer. Yes, Hugh was also over 600 years old, but he hadn't done much potioneering work for over 500 years. The comment, of course, promptly backfired as Dagger, whose patroness had still been in the room at the time, realized that Hugh's experience with the stone could make him a valuable member of the team. Although Flamel didn't like Hugh risking himself like this, he could not see any fault with Dagger's reasoning. The net result was that Hogwarts had suffered another staff shuffling and currently had no potions master. Snape promised to look for a replacement, and he offered to do double duty as headmaster and potions master in case of emergency. No one really liked that idea, as the man would likely be overworked. However, it was the only thing they could think of at the time. The next issue involved Dumbledore's army members who had initially enlisted to fight Umbridge and suddenly found themselves age 17 or older. Those who had graduated from Hogwarts were going to be sent on the mission no matter what. However, Snape, Dumbledore, and Flamel had argued vehemently that 7th-year Hogwarts students who had reached age 17 should be exempted from this draft. Dagger, unfortunately, had refused. Hendrickson would be less likely to consider the younger witches and wizards as possible threats, and the students would be able to resume their classes as soon as Hendrickson was caught. In fact, if the stone were retrieved before September, the 7th years would gain real-life experience and not have to worry about missing classes. Hogsmeade, not surprisingly, was absolute bedlam. A good 25% of the adult population had joined Dumbledore's army to defend themselves against Voldemort, and with many of the London wizards killed on Judgment Day, the unit couldn't afford that many absentees. Flamel eventually had to convince all of these possible deserters that they were only going after one man and that there was no need for alarm. If anything, they could get an international vacation out of it while on deployment. Snape was still affiliated with the British Secret Service and informed Flamel that many SAS and Secret Service personnel would be tagging along for the ride. Flamel heartily approved, as the presence of the SAS people would make it easier to deal with and work around Muggles. All of the Dumbledore's army members would be deployed in groups of 3. This was done for 2 purposes. First and foremost was for protection in case Hendrickson got nasty. The second, of course, was the simple fact that wizards with access to the stone tended to do bad things unless they had at least one chaperone. What good would it do for someone to manage to take the stone off of Hendrickson only to fidelius it to himself? He looked over the most recent correspondences with Radna. The American Ministry of Magic and the FBI had searched Hendrickson's house as soon as word leaked out that he had faked his death. Of course, there was no Hendrickson there, let alone the stone. Flamel wasn't surprised, as he suspected that Hendrickson had conjured enough gold to pay for hotels anywhere in the world. The raiders did, however, manage to come away with a few components needed to make the stone and a copy of Flamel's notes, which Radna had immediately destroyed. Flamel would have been astonished to know that Hendrickson intended to use the stone, unlike Flamel, but not do so frivolously. The American alchemist was only keeping it away from the rest of the world because he thought the government would abuse it. With something as powerful as the stone, no one could be trusted. The Muggle phone rang in Flamel's office. Wanting to scream in frustration, he picked it up. "This is Flamel. Who's calling?" An unfamiliar voice responded. "Minister, allow me to introduce myself. My name is John Jefferson, and I work for Amblin Entertainment. I was wondering if I could discuss a project with you. Flamel recognized the name Amblin and had an awful suspicion. Trying to maintain control, he said, Mr. Jefferson, I'm a busy man, and in case you're wondering, a powerful magical object is loose. If you wouldn't mind, I'd. Jefferson cut in. You don't want a movie made out of your life story. We've got a censored copy of your diary, Minister. If you wish, you can come over and see it for yourself. There are no references to the stone in there. Flamel's mind raced. A censored copy. Then it hit him, the translated English copy he had left on his desk to be used as a memoir. How the hell had the movie company gotten that? Never mind, he thought. Deal with the problem. The minister thought about it for a second. He had done everything he could to record what had happened fairly and impartially. Yes, he sometimes got irritated about things which took place, and there were things even he got confused about. However, he wrote things down as they had transpired, and this made the censored diary a valuable historical document. It had never occurred to him that the story of his life would make a good Muggle movie. How many people grew up in the middle of the Black Death and lived long enough to tell the tale on the big screen? He chuckled and answered the question. 3. If the moviegoers wanted death and violence, that Kashe jerk who had messed with the bubonic plague would do pretty well. Grindelwald wouldn't be a bad story, either. And the world didn't need to worry about them anymore, with Grindelwald in Azkaban and Kashe losing his head in 1360. Flamel spoke cautiously. It's an interesting idea, assuming you have the censored diary. I'll think about it. However, if there is any reference to the stone or any other classified information, I'm going to have someone destroy the sources and obliviate you. Flamel swore at the last sentence. He would have loved to do it himself, except that the Aes Sedai oaths prevented him from lying or using magic as a weapon. Is it all right if we include magical history as well, Minister? Flamel was getting increasingly frustrated, and his ire only grew when he saw people lined up outside his office. Assuming I censor it, yes. The more safe and correct information the Muggles receive about the magical world, the better. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to. We will discuss this later. Good day. Flamel hung up and composed himself. Couldn't those idiots make a story about Nohapishtin and the Hammer of Ra instead, and not bother him? He answered his question almost immediately. Of course they could. He wouldn't be surprised in the least if one of Amblin's competitors had already bought the rights to a Hammer of Ra movie, and Amblin was now trying to get in on the action. Chapter 295, The New Stone. Wednesday, July 24, 1996, Oval Office, White House, Washington. Deke United States of America. An increasingly frazzled and sleep-deprived Travis Radner marched into the Oval Office. You wish to see me, Mr. President? Clinton nodded. I'm afraid so, Mr. Radner. I know you're a bit busy, so I'll try to keep this short. Unfortunately, this is going to make your life a little busier. Radner nearly screamed. I'm in the middle of deploying a bunch of people to chase after Hendrickson and that philosopher's stone, Mr. President. In addition, I'm trying to think of a way to sue Harold Green to keep them under control if and when they produce another stone. What else am I supposed to do, sir? I'm doing everything I can with the stone. Clinton nodded apologetically. I understand, Mr. Radner. Unfortunately, this issue is completely independent of the stone. You see, someone has discovered a rather disturbing use for the Geminio charm. Radner collapsed in the seat opposite the president. No more nukes, please. Merlin's beard, no more nukes. We don't have the manpower for anything new right now. You won't be doing this alone, Mr. Radner. You'll be assisted by the Federal Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Radner blinked. The what? Bureau of Engraving and Printing. They're responsible for producing all-American paper currency. Radner put his head in his hands. Are you saying that someone is using the Geminio charm to print counterfeit money? I'm afraid so, Mr. Radner. We've just received a report from a restaurant in Georgia where someone saw two $20 bills with the same serial number and markings, and both of them were genuine, according to the machines in the store which test for counterfeit money. You're sure that this was done by magic, and not by something entirely Muggle? Clinton shook his head. We're not sure. However, it's a distinct possibility. After all, the world knows about the Geminio charm now thanks to Voldemort's nuclear terrorism. Furthermore, the machines which accepted the bills in the restaurant are up to date and are designed to detect all known forgeries. They wouldn't be able to detect magical copies, though. Radner winced. No, sir, they would not. Clinton looked at him. Any recommendations? Presumably you know how to deal with magical counterfeiting. Radner explained. Well, there are enchantments on the galleon, nut, and sickle coins used by the wizarding community to prevent them from being duplicated. I'm not familiar with the exact details, however. Could these enchantments be applied to Muggle money? Radner shrugged. We're not sure, sir. No one has ever tried it. I suspect no. I sure hope that it will work. Then again, sir, I don't know the details. Do you know who would, Mr. Radner? Radner nodded. Probably the merpeople, the beings who gave us that obelisk. They're well known for trading around the world. If there's anyone who is a master at dealing with fake money, it would be them. Can you set up a meeting with them, Mr. Radner? Radner sighed. I'm a bit busy, but I'll see what I can do. Ziggurat Labs, Manchester, England, for immediate release. Volunteers needed for wizard genetic research testing. Ziggurat Labs is proud to announce clinical trials for a test to determine the presence of wizarding genes in Muggles. We at Ziggurat have determined that there are two clusters of genes which appear to be shared across all wizards. Although we are not entirely certain what exactly they do, and which parts of these complexes are actually responsible for spellcasting ability, we are now sure that wizarding ability has a genetic component. Wizards have known that their powers were hereditary for many years. When two wizards marry each other and have children, the children are almost always wizards. When a wizard marries a Muggle, the children tend to be Muggles. However, it is believed that these children can be carriers of the wizarding genes, and as a result may be capable of producing wizarding grandchildren. The tests will be focusing on 6 genes. G, a complex seen in giants. M, a complex seen primarily in merpeople. V, a complex seen primarily in Vila. W, a canid complex associated with werewolves. And Q and Z, the conjectured wizarding genes. Although we have a theory as to what exactly Q and Z do, we will not disclose this information until we are absolutely certain that the theory is correct. This will likely require several more experiments and trials similar to this one. Subjects will be asked to take a simple blood test and then be asked questions about their wizarding history. Have strange things happened to you in the past? Can you see things others cannot? All interviews will be conducted in a manner which will ensure strict confidentiality. Note that these experiments will require a test which will likely result in a mild electric shock. Be advised that we will be conducting the test under close supervision. At no point will any of our patients be in any danger. Both wizards and Muggles are welcome to apply, and compensation will be provided for all applicants. For more information, contact Michael Parson at Ziggurat Labs. Com. Harold Green Pharmaceutical Corporation. Mr. Green was halfway through his lunch when he discovered that a large red object was sitting in his glass of Sprite. He recognized it immediately and breathed a deep sigh of relief. The stone was back, and with it, Harold Green's fortunes. He looked up to see Dmitri Vasilov beaming with pride. Pointing at the new stone, the Ukrainian smiled. Mr. Green, meet your new philosopher's stone. Hopefully we'll be able to get something useful out of it this time. That's great news, Dmitri. Have you been able to produce any elixir of life? Vasilov reached into his pocket and pulled a test tube filled with the glowing liquid. Yes, so works fine, at least on a sick frog. How about gold? Vasilov shook his head. I haven't tried that yet. To be honest, I'm a bit reluctant given the radiation leaks last time. I want to make sure I've got the thing with the mercury down pat before working with the gold. Don't worry about it, Dmitri. You've done well. However, there's one thing I need to ask of you. Vasilov nodded. Sure, what is it? Green looked at Vasilov, hard, and pointed at the stone. I need you to swear an unbreakable vow that this stone will not leave this building. I don't want you to run away with it like Hendrickson did. Vasilov blinked. He hadn't expected this. He had planned to run off with the stone and bring it to Rasputin. If the stone was not allowed to leave the building, he'd have to sacrifice his own life to help Rasputin bring back Kashay. He didn't know how to make a Horcrux. Perhaps he could research that. Suddenly, an idea came to him. He would indeed swear that this stone would not leave the building. After all, he had the instructions. He could just make 2 stones, for Delius II to himself, so no one else could find it, walk away with that, and disclose the location to Rasputin. Vasilov nodded. It's a bit unorthodox, but I'll do it. Good, Dmitri. You will also swear that the stone becomes the property of Herald Green Pharmaceutical Corporation, and you will do everything you can to make our company prosper with it. Vasilov agreed to that as well. The second stone wouldn't be the property of Herald Green, and that was the one that mattered. Finally, you will not make another stone as long as this one exists. We need to keep our monopoly. Vasilov hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and nodded once more. He'd just hand over the notes to an accomplice and have that person make the second stone. Green stood and shook Vasilov's hand. You're a good man, Dmitri. It's a pity we didn't run into you earlier. Now, shall we get to work? To be continued. Joint Zelender Trading Post Kodiak Island. Merpeople Ambassador Zeke had a busy day. As usual, since the trading post has been given access to several Muggle communications networks. The first 2 of these, called radio and telephone, were voice only, meaning that the only member of the original delegation speaking both Surface Mermish and English Asterisk, the Architect Guild wizard sent to create some necessary infrastructure, had to spend more time translating than conjuring pools or soft silt pathways. Things got easier when yesterday, Muggle technicians installed a handful of computers connected to their great network. The merpeople were cautious at first. The word internet somehow made them think of the cruel fishing instruments of the seafaring Muggles, but under the guidance of the Muggles, a few of them were quick to learn the basic functions of the machine. And unlike the others, these worked by sending and receiving letters, which merpeople could do just as well as any surface dweller. Speaking of those Muggles, some of them adjusted very quickly to the merpeople's presence and acted quite strange around them, displaying unsatiable curiosity and an obsession with magic and magical beings most unexpected given their professions. From what he gathered, magic and their so-called electricity didn't like each other, to put it lightly, and overall ignorance. Unexpected questions were asked, and many times they couldn't give an answer, either limited by lack of knowledge. Mr. Zeke, why there is no fossil record of your species, or by the requested information being classified for the time being. Ambassador, did any giants or centaurs or other magical beings survive the destruction of those islands? Also, thanks to them, the spider walkers now got a new name, Drider. Being told what the word meant, he could not deny the morphological similarity. Of course, learning more about that game, or mythology, or whatever it was part of, he voiced some protests for fear of association with evil, but by then the name stuck. Right now, Zeke has just finished writing a response to a high-ranking Muggle government official from the Federal Bureau of Engraving and Printing. The humans wanted to learn about wizard money, specifically, how it's protected against copying. He truthfully responded that it involves magic and runes that prevent the object from being Geminioed altogether, but only the goblins know the exact details of the process. He also warned the Muggles about leprechaun gold. taking a mental note to call over some goblin experts from Rock to Rattle and to avoid accepting payment in Muggle money whenever possible. He opened up a new email, coming from some DRC, and began reading. Chapter 296, Howie and Hamland Exposed. Wednesday, July 24, 1996. Tonks, Residence United Kingdom. Nymphadora Tonks was upset for the first time in a long time. Not only was Remus Lupin dead, he had died barely months before this had come out. Most of the world was reacting with absolute amazement at Ziggurat Labs' advertisement for people to be tested for wizarding genes. The company's website had gone down from all of the traffic, and rumor had it that many famous individuals were going to Manchester to participate in the experiment. However, Tonks wasn't interested in that announcement. She had been floored by the second, less-known announcement, the one released only to the wizarding community via Severus Snape, headmaster of Hogwarts. Snape had made a tremendous amount of progress on the wolfsbane pill. That, combined with the medical information taken by from the tame werewolves who had been transforming in Hogsmeade, had advanced the study of lycanthropy by leaps and bounds. However, the possible discovery of the W gene, combined with the assets of a sophisticated Muggle biological engineering company like Ziggurat, had actually convinced Snape that it could soon be possible to do something which had, until today, believed to be magically impossible. Tonks had had to read the document 3 times to confirm she wasn't imagining it. Yet there it was, a possible vaccine for lycanthropy. Both Snape and the doctors at Ziggurat admitted that it would likely take a lot of work for a successful vaccine to be prepared. New medical products usually took a while to make, and that wasn't even considering the fact that the efficacy of the treatment could only be tested once per month on a relatively small sample size. However, the simple fact remained that the combination of magic and Muggle technology had done something which wizards for eons had considered to be impossible. There were rumors that the British Ministry of Magic had loaned Ziggurat Labs no fewer than 5 million galleons, that is, £25 million, for the vaccine project. Emperor Sorta, the leader of the werewolf empire of Lugnag, had done the same through Atlantis, as that nation was still hidden from the Muggles. Despite this infusion of money, Snape had cautioned that it would likely be years, possibly even decades, for the vaccine to be safe for public use. Flamel would normally have commented on the loan, except that he was nowhere in sight, because of the flap over the missing stone. Tonks hoped that Hendrickson knew what he was doing. However, the simple fact remained that power like that tended to corrupt. Remus had told her of an old Muggle story, where an evil wizard named Sauron had invested all of his power in a magical ring, which could be used to rule all of sentient life. After Sauron was incapacitated in battle, a hero named Isildur, who had promised to destroy the ring, was about to do so when he realized what he going to be throwing away. At the last minute, he had changed his mind and used the ring to disappear. The same tale included stories where 9 people were given rings of power, but became corrupt, turning them into creatures which seemed awfully like dementors. Remus had always wondered if the author of that story, a man named Tolkien, had actually seen something he hadn't been supposed to, and no one realized it. She thought back to Ziggurat's first announcement, the one about the genetic testing. The idea of wizarding ability being passed down through genes intrigued her, particularly the possibility that it took more than one gene to produce a wizard. If these genes were rare, it would explain the low number of wizards, as a person would have to catch lightning in a cauldron twice to get both of them. It also explained the possibility of Muggle-born wizards, where 2 people with half the genes produced a child with all of them. Finally, it explained the existence of squibs cases where there was a flaw in one of the genes, and you wound up with someone who was partially, but not all, wizard. Filch had sent out an excited message to the staff of Hogwarts, claiming that he may be a partial wizard after all. Harry Potter had written to Filch, claiming that the caretaker could very well be a Z-only wizard. Even more surprisingly, Dudley Dursley had come out as a Z-wizard despite his terrible upbringing. The possibility that wizarding ability was not an all-or-nothing deal was going to change the magical world. Tonks was sure of it. The biggest impact would be the simple fact that there were likely many times as many people with some of the wizard genes than there were wizards. Being struck with by lightning once was much more likely than being struck by lightning twice, after all. Tonks looked at her pocket watch and realized that it was about time for her to get dinner with Megan Baldwin. The two 20-somethings had become close friends, and Megan had interviewed her extensively about life as a witch. The only thing Megan had been irritated about to this point was the fact that she couldn't get her hair to change color on a whim Ziggurat Labs. The line went around the block 3 times. It had reached the point where Michael Parson had to start turning people away and telling them to come back for the next clinical trial. The simple fact was that he couldn't deal with all these people at the same time. Half the subjects had grumbled a bit about being dismissed. Yet when the word leaked out that 3 of the people near the end of the line were going to be chosen for the study despite their late arrival, not that many people complained out. After all, the lucky ones had been Princess Diana, now the King Mother, Sarah Ferguson, and King William V. Naturally, the paparazzi wanted to watch the royals take the test. Parson, however, would have nothing of it. William, still trying to figure out what he was going to do now that he had the throne, felt a sigh of relief as the scientists closed the door to the lab, blocking out the reporters. The doctor was just about to explain the procedure when William heard a startled swear at his side. He turned to see a wand falling to the ground and Fergie shaking her hand feverishly. Figuring that he had to help his aunt and the doctor, he picked the wand up off the floor and examined it. It didn't seem all that dangerous, regardless of what everyone said. His aunt must have hurt herself with a splinter or something. He put the wand back on the table and asked Fergie whether she was all right. The Duchess of York, not surprisingly, complained that people shouldn't leave things like that around, especially with the royal family in the area. William grunted she had a point. Turning back to the doctor, he was about to make the suggestion when he realized every single doctor was staring at him. His mother was looking at him in disbelief as well. 2 of the doctors looked at each other. Finally, one of them turned to Parson. "This can't be happening. No way. This is impossible." Parson looked a bit shell-shocked as well, but kept his composure. "It could just be a fluke, guys. Let's get him tested just like everyone else. You know the protocol. The fact that you've got a crown on your head doesn't make you any less human." William scratched his head. What the bloody hell was going on here? Was he going to get into trouble just for trying to pick up a wand? Presidential mansion how in Himland. One of the advantages of being a Yahoo who worked in the presidential mansion was that the centaurs tended to overlook him simply as a member of the hired help. He had access to rooms where people often weren't allowed to go after all. Not all centaurs were wizards, and they didn't want to have to clean up after themselves. In this case, it was the bedroom of one of the main security guards. Making sure not to make any noise, he reached into his pocket for the list of code words his cell leader in 2 exceeds 4 had given him. He looked up today's date on the list and found the correct code word. Walking over to a blank space in the wall, he inscribed the code word into the wall. The wall dissolved, revealing a closet with a key in it. Entering another code word from a second list, the glowing white light surrounding the key faded, and the Muggle was able to pick it up. Now he had to be careful. Waiting until the guards were out of sight, he grabbed the stolen invisibility cloak and hurried down the hall towards the room holding the protector. Consulting yet a third list, he couldn't fault the centaurs for their paranoia here. He entered another code word, and the door opened. Seconds later, he was face to face with the protector. Even though the Muggle knew what his mission was, he couldn't help but stare in amazement at it. The magical statue, known as the Protector, had been hiding the land of the Houyhnhnms from the Muggle world since shortly after Gulliver's visit in 5 Ag. It had been lovingly crafted out of metal and wood by centaur arms and hooves hundreds of years ago, and it was made to look like a rearing horse. The horse glowed brightly in the dark room, and the Muggle recognized it immediately from the flag of the land of the Houyhnhnms. The Muggle confessed that it would be a shame to destroy it. However, he had his job. The only way the Yahoos could be freed would be if a nation like the United States or the Muggle world in general found out about what was going on here. Considering what had happened in Círdan, it was unlikely that any of the Yahoos would be leaving here any time soon. Making sure he was safely under the invisibility cloak, he reached into his belt and withdrew a small pouch. He extracted an object from the pouch and promptly unfolded it so it became a large metal rod. He raised the rod over his head and began whacking away at the statue. Not surprisingly, a couple of alarms went off. He expected that, however, and figured that he had at least a good 2 minutes before the four legs realized what was going on. 60 seconds later, he had bashed in one leg and dented the metal casing. The light, however, was still on. Exasperated, he went for the other leg and was rewarded with a shearing sound as it broke in two. With both of its supports gone, the statue fell off its pedestal and broke into two pieces. The light surrounding it winked out, plunging the room into darkness. For the first time in almost 300 years, the land of the Houyhnhnms was visible to the Muggles. Congratulating himself on a job well done, he hurriedly folded up his makeshift bat and headed for the exit. He didn't make it in time, however, as the guards intercepted him just as he was about to leave the room. He had completely forgotten about the fact that Revelio Hominum could track invisible people. Seconds later, the 2 exceeds 4 saboteur was dead. The damage, however, had already been done. Japan Airlines Flight 133,000 feet above the Eastern Pacific. Kanami Yamamura was bored. There wasn't really much to do out here, and she was sick and tired about her co-pilot complaining about his unfaithful wife. Granted, things might have been different if he had actually been trying to hit on her, but that wasn't the case. She had an amusing thought of the two of them getting frisky in the cockpit. The plane was on automatic pilot, after all, and no one was allowed into the cockpit in mid-flight. Rather convenient, in a way. The view outside was of an endless expanse of water blocked in a few cases by clouds. Occasionally, she would see whitecaps on a few of the waves, and here and there an oil tanker. But that was it. Had it not been for the fact that her aircraft had a tracking device, she wouldn't have been able to tell where she was. She figured she should at least do some kind of routine check to get something done. She was about to start on the checklist when there was a huge flash of blue light outside. Seconds later, a freak gust of wind suddenly slammed into the bottom of the plane, lifting it by a good 200 feet. Her training took over, and she immediately looked to the safety of the aircraft. Miraculously, there wasn't any major damage. Boeing built their planes well. The co-pilot looked at her. What the hell was that? Yamamura looked at the controls frantically. I don't know, Daesuk-san. Did you see anything on the radar? I sure didn't. I'll check some more of the readouts here and tell the stewardesses to check on the passengers. Meanwhile, you call Tokyo. Yamamura nodded and reached for the intercom. Tokyo, this is JL001. We've just experienced a bad case of vertical wind shear, taking us up 60 meters or so. I saw a flash of light just before that happened. Anyone have any idea what that was? Over. The response came back quickly. Are you declaring a mayday? Over. Negative, Tokyo. The plane seems fine, and the co-pilot is checking on the passengers. It's got to be some kind of weather-related problem. What are your coordinates? Over. We're currently around 140 W, 5N. We're in the middle of nowhere. Over. There was a brief delay as the meteorologists in Japan consulted their charts. The pilot took advantage of the opportunity to look out the window to see if she could determine what had caused the anomaly. There appeared to be a large cloud forming beneath the aircraft, one which hadn't been there earlier. Probably water vapor being lifted by the updraft, she thought. She could see land through the holes in the cloud. The terrain appeared to be primarily rolling hills covered with fields, and of all things, rainforests. The meteorologist came back on. JP001, we're not picking up anything here. What do you see out your window? Yamamura tried to explain. There's a big cloud forming underneath us, maybe down at 2,000 feet or so. I can see the land underneath it, lots of rainforest and... Then it hit her, land. There was no land anywhere in the vicinity. This had to be a hallucination. She must have hit her head. She activated the intercom, reassured everyone to keep their seatbelts fastened, and told the co-pilot to come back to the cockpit. When he did, so he seemed very agitated. Kanami-san, take a look out the window. Tell me if you're seeing what I think I'm seeing. Kanami bit her lip. Don't tell me you see land down there too. Did you hit your head as well? No, I didn't. What's more, virtually all of the passengers are seeing land down there as well. The stewardesses are reporting that passengers think we're lost. Are we? I still want to know what hit us. Kanami looked at the GPS. It now reported 139W5N. Airspeed was normal, oil pressure was normal. As far as the plane was concerned, everything was fine. Then where the hell had that land come from? The meteorologist came back on after a brief delay. Land? What do you mean, land? There's no land out there, over. Kanami's frustration boiled over. That's what I thought, yet I'm not hallucinating. Everyone else in this aircraft is seeing clouds and land down there as well, over. Everything is normal on board, and the plane is running safely. I don't know what that was, over. Tokyo's controller came back on. Check your coordinates again, over. 139W5N. Course 89, airspeed 400 knots, right on target. Now we've got a lake and a field popping up in the clouds, and the clouds are getting thicker down there. I tell you this is real. Get a satellite on it pronto. This is not natural, Tokyo. Could it be a volcanic eruption? Over. With no mountain, I doubt it, and I don't see any lava. In fact, good Lord, there are buildings down there. What is this, James Bond's villain's hideout? Over. Kanami started trying to figure out what to tell the passengers. Either that, or some wizard is really fond of practical jokes. Over. Oval Office. Clinton already had enough on his plate. Now this. He barked into the phone. Where are the coordinates again? The head of the FAR replied. The pilot reported that the land was at 140W5N. Last time I checked, there wasn't any land out there. However, sir, we've got a lot more information now. We've got land sightings from flights all over the eastern Pacific. Something appeared between South America and Hawaii, and I'll be damned if I know what it is. Whatever it isn't just an island. It's something the size of a small continent. What's more, there is evidence that it's inhabited. Clinton's jaw dropped. Inhabited. Yes, sir. I suspect that they're farmers. They've cleared out large tracts of rainforest in there. There have to be wizards involved, sir. I can't imagine any other way continents can appear out of nowhere. The phone line connected to NASA started flashing. Telling the FAR person to wait, he switched over to the spaceman. Well, Chairman, do you have a satellite picture? The NASA chairman answered. Yes, Mr. President. We're sending over a picture now from one of the geostationary satellites. Thank God the anomaly was so close to the equator. How big is it? You're not going to believe it, sir. It's huge. The new island is roughly the size of Alaska, and it's centered at roughly 130 W7s. Here, sir, see for yourself. Clinton opened the message and looked at the attachment. There was a huge, roughly circular cloud bank about 15 degrees across, centered those particular coordinates. He literally could not believe what he was seeing. Then it finally hit him. Círdan, Zalenda, Lilliput, Brobdingnag. Now that the statute of secrecy had fallen, were those hidden nations starting to come out. The wizards must have realized that the United States already knew about Círdan, and the Xylens and Merpeople had already announced their existence to the world. Who would be next? Who were these people? His train was disrupted by the distinctive sound of someone apparating into the room. It was Radner, and his eyes were wild. He spoke 3 words. "It's Howie and Hamlin, sir." Clinton's mind raced. He was barely able to ask, "Which one is that?" "The Centaur homeland, sir. The one where the centaurs are the upper class and the humans are the lower class. The Ciudadani term Yahoo is actually Howiehendom." Clinton felt as if he were drinking from a fire hose. "Centaurs? Did you say centaurs?" "Yes, sir. Half horse, half man. I don't know how that happened, but it did. They have the strength and stamina of a horse and the intelligence of a human being. They are quite remarkable creatures with an extremely advanced magical civilization. The head of state is President Nihim, and the official name of the territory is the Republic of the Howiehandams. Why didn't the president announce they were going to come out? Surprising people is not a good idea." Radner drew a deep breath. "My guess is that something unusual has happened there. Atlantis is reporting that none of the Howiehandam diplomats had any idea this was going to happen. Furthermore, Nihim was out of the loop as well. That is most disturbing, as the Protector is inside the President's mansion." The Protector. A powerful magical artifact, usually in the form of a statue, which hides the nation from the Muggles. How anyone could deactivate it without his authority is beyond me. I can only think of one explanation, sir, and it's not pretty. Clinton bit his lip. "I hate to think. Tell me." Radner sighed. "Many people have seen signs painted on rocks in the fields of Howiehamland in Gulliver, the language of the Gulliver Consortium. This language is close enough to English for many English-speaking Muggles to understand bits and pieces of it. The biggest problems involve the Thorn and Eth characters, still present in Icelandic, but which in modern English have been replaced with th. At any rate, the signs are asking for the United States' help in overthrowing the Centaur overlords." Clinton couldn't believe it. Why would we assist in the overthrow of a ruler of a democratic foreign country, let alone one we know nothing about? Radner shook his head. "The messages continue to say that if we felt it justified to help free the Muggles of Círdan, how could we not intervene in a situation where all humans are being discriminated against?" Clinton swore. "Christ, these tiny nations want us to play grade school hall monitor and spank the bullies for them. It appears that way, so remember Atlantis cannot intervene in national affairs, and if they can't, we're the strongest Muggle power. What's your recommendation, Mr. Radner?" Radner leaned over the president's desk. "We need to put a gag order on this immediately. Sir Atlantis has reported that Nihim did not authorize exposure of his nation. You may recall that Gulliver Consortium nations have to pass a 3-4 vote in the national senates and a unanimous vote in the Gulliver Senate itself in order to allow for exposure. That has clearly not happened here. As a result, we cannot let the word leak out. Dagher is ordering everyone to shut down all Muggle references to Howiehamland until we get official permission from Nihim." Radner paused. "Sir, I suspect that we won't get official permission. Why would they tell everyone they enslave humans? All that would do is get the entire world mad at them. The more that I think about it, the more I think that someone in one of the human resistance movements wanted to up the ante and destroyed the Protector to blow the whistle on the enslavement and force the world to intervene." "Human resistance movements?" "Yes, Mr. President, advocating rebellion against the centaurs. The 3 biggest are human heritage, 2 exceeds 4, and the organization. We're still trying to figure out which one of them did it. Sir, information is still coming in." Clinton tried to make sense of it all. "All right, Mr. Radner. Lock up all the news and obliviate everyone who has found out about Howiehamland so far. Keep me posted if anything changes." "Yes, sir." Hain, Marquesas Islands, French Polynesia, Edward Vane swore loudly. Where was a damn wizard when you wanted one? He had this motorboat for 7 or 8 years, and it was much better than canoes and so forth when it came to fishing. A motorboat wouldn't do much good, however, without a motor. Well, if all else failed, he'd do it the old way. He knew many of the old ways. Methods were tried and true and had been tested over 100 years. If he had to paddle, he'd paddle. Adjusting his head to keep the sun out of his eyes, he headed away from the beach and back over to his house to tell his wife he was going to be taking the canoe. Much to his surprise, she offered to help with the paddling and spearfishing. He took one look at her 8-month pregnant belly and turned her down. If she decided to have the baby while in the canoe, it would get very messy. Shrugging, he headed into the supply area to pick up the paddles. He was just about to leave the house when the entire world suddenly disappeared in a blinding blue flash. Edward swore once more and put his hands on his head as his wife reached for her rosary. Panicked remarks in the nearby homes indicated that he hadn't been hallucinating. Turning to his wife, he roared, "Marie, what in damnation was that?" His wife said nothing. All she did was point out the door in the direction of the beach. "This can't be right. I must be possessed by an evil spirit who wants to steal our child. No way." Edward spun as he spoke. "You're not possessed, Marie. You're moan, dear." Outside the hut, the entire landscape had changed. Less than a minute ago, his front door offered him a view of the beach and the ocean beyond it. The beach was still there, however, but the ocean was not. What had once been the mighty East Pacific had suddenly shrunk to a river maybe 5-7 meters across. Beyond that was land which should not, and could not, be there. The far side of the river was blocked off by a large, forbidding red fence. Edward could see an area between the fence and the river where nothing appeared to live, which seemed kind of odd. There were signs on the far side, facing off into the distance. Edward suspected that they would read something along the lines of dangerous area. Don't go here. Patrolling the area on the far side of the fence were a bunch of men who appeared to be riding horses. They seemed to be looking around in confusion. The blue flash which had brought them her must have surprised them as well. Beyond the patrol area was thick rainforest. The only building in sight was a large house with a hayfield nearby. Presumably, that was where the guards lived. The terrain was hilly and could have passed for any landscape on the island. Edward tried to understand what he was seeing. For a second, it almost looked as if his island had suddenly become part of one larger landmass, or had been part of that landmass all along, and no one had known about it. This had to be work of evil spirits, he thought. He tried to look to the bright side, however. He wouldn't have to use the motorboat or canoe go fishing, as he could just wade into the river. He walked out of the house and looked around. People were slowly coming out of their little homes, pointing across the river in confusion and asking what was going on. Various local guards and Jesus were mentioned quite frequently, as were Satan and other evil spirits. They apparently had no idea what was happening either. Someone hollered over at the mounted men on the other side of the river. "Messieurs, what's going here? What just happened?" Edward was surprised by the mounted men's reaction. They swore and spun to look at them, and their jaws all dropped in unison. Finally, one of them shouted something in an unintelligible dialect of English. Edward couldn't understand what he was saying, but he understood the tone well enough to guess its meaning. "Oh, shit." The three men turned to talk to each other. Then, in the blink of an eye, one of them disappeared, just like that. The disappearance immediately made Edward think of wizards. Had they just been visited by some wizards? He saw movement out of the corner of his eye and turned to see three men starting to wade across the river. The two remaining guards stared at each other momentarily and then did something even more remarkable. They shoved a branch into the area beyond the fence where nothing grew and withdrew it. They inspected the branch momentarily and swore some more. Nothing happened for a minute or so, and this allowed Edward's friends to make it onto the far bank and start walking towards the guards. The man in the lead was introducing himself and trying to start up a conversation. In response, one of the mounted men jumped over the fence. For the first time, Edward and the rest of the villagers could see the man's entire body. It was half man, half horse. This was not good. Hitch, Rach, and Hnam nearly fell over when the blue flash hit. Dropping the ball they were kicking around border duty tended to be boring. They looked around the area in confusion. Hnam spoke first. What the hell was that? Did you see a blue flash? Rach nodded. Yup. What's more, I'm even sober. You have any idea what it was? Hnam shook his head and turned to Hitch. Beats me. Hitch, what about you? Do you recognize that? Hitch's eyes were wide, and he kicked the fence blocking the death zone which would prevent anyone, Yahoo or Centaur, from crossing the border. Due to an unusual quirk in the geography, this part of Houyhnhnm territory could not be handled by the Protector. As a result, it was left to the Muggles, and powerful spells were put in place which would prevent any intrusion from the Centaur's side as long as the Protector was still up. I have no idea. He was interrupted by some shouts from the other side of the river. All three centaurs turned as one to see the Muggles staring, pointing, and shouting at them. Hnam blinked. Is it my imagination, or can they see us? That's impossible, right? Rach nodded. They should just see ocean. Don't worry, they can't see us. I don't know who they're talking to. The three centaurs watched as the Muggles continued hollering in their bizarre language. The entire city was looking out now. Something quite unusual was happening. Presumably, they were trying to figure out what that light had come from as well. Then it hit them. That light was obviously wizard work. If so, how could the Muggles see it with the Protector still in place? All three centaurs blanched at the implications as Hnam summed everything up with 2 words, uttered at a loud neigh. Oh shit. Rach gritted his teeth. Don't tell me that Nihim lowered the Protector because the statute of secrecy is gone. He can't be that stupid. Hnam, head back to the capital and figure out what the hell is going on. Hnam nodded and apparated out of there. Most of the centaur wizards were on border duty as they were a last resort against Yahoos escaping and warning the Muggles. Several of the shouting Muggles began wading across the river. Gingerly, Rach picked up a stick and shoved it through a hole in the fence into the death zone. As he had been afraid of, the stick didn't wither immediately. Rach and Hitch stared at each other. Gulliver did something to us. I can't imagine anything else convincing Nihim to put the shield down. The 2 remaining border guards continued talking to each other. Hitch had a suggestion. What do we do now? Enslave them. Rach shook his head vehemently. We can't, as by law they are considered foreigners and cannot be enslaved. But they're on Houyhnhnm territory. Actually, Hitch, they're not. We think they are, but they aren't until they get past this fence, and when they do, we have to treat them like diplomats. However, we've got to do something about this. If they meet any Yahoos, the entire Muggle world will be after us. We've got to make sure they don't get any further into the country. Hitch snorted. If the Protector's down, the Muggles are going to come after us anyway. I doubt these fellows are going to make much of a difference. Rach grunted as the first man reached other side. Quite possibly. However, we don't want to pick a fight. They're probably scared and curious where we came from. Keep an eye on me, Rach. I'm going to talk to them. Like hell you are. I can tell you don't know a single damn word they're saying. We'll try sign language, unless you've got a better idea. Wish me luck. Not waiting for Hitch's response, Rach vaulted over the fence and came down on the other side. For the first time, the Muggles could see his entire body. Hopefully, the sight of a half-man, half-horse would surprise the Muggles and stall for time. It worked. Some of the people on the far bank started ululating wildly and running into their houses. One of them eventually returned with a long metal object in his hands. It appeared to be a long tube with a trigger grip. Half the people on the Centaur's side of the river promptly began running back in fear. One of them, however, stayed put, though he trembled slightly. Rach showed the visitors his bow, and with them all watching, lay it on the ground. He then tried to convey the message that he wasn't going to hurt them. He then pleaded with the Muggles, or at least he tried to stay on their side of the river until everyone sorted out what was going on. The man with the long tube swore and pointed it at him. 2 seconds later, however, the man next to him cuffed him in the head with his fist. The tube man's eyes glazed over, and he fell down with the tube splashing into the sand. Rach headed down to the last man on the Centaur's side of the river. "Hello there. I'm Rach, and I'm a border guard for the Republic of the Houyhnhnms. I'm sorry, sir, but this is a restricted area. Stay on your side of the river, and we'll see what we can do to clean all this up." He had no idea whether he got the message across. The Muggle was silent for a moment and then began muttering something. He pointed to himself, to Rach, and then began and gesturing wildly. The meaning was obvious. "I'm X. Who are you? What's all this stuff? And what was that blue flash?" Rach didn't know what to say. He could answer all the questions, of course. However, he was a border guard, not a diplomat, and was afraid of the questions yet to come. He walked over to the patrol house and came out with a few galleons and Houyhnhnm trinkets. As a gesture of goodwill, he dropped it into the hands of the Muggle. The Muggle smiled and showed them to the people on the Muggle side, and the mood there brightened. A few seconds later, another man waded across with something which looked like a ceremonial mask and a bucket full of fish. It was a start, at least. The Republic would need the best relations it could get with the Muggles before the news broke of the existence of Yahoo's ocean floor, Rock-to-Rattle border Indian Ocean. The Centaur rematerialized after the Portkey travel and promptly fell over and slid a good 2 meters on the floor. He looked up to see concerned merpeople and humans gather around him, trying to help him up. One of the wizards, sympathy evident in his voice, asked him, "You're new to this, aren't you? Next time you use Portkey, try to be as immobile as possible when you touch it." The dazed centaur nodded, then wildly looked around when something important dawned on him. Instead of the colossal underground and underwater Portkey hole right under Rock-to-Rattle's greatest building, he was definitely elsewhere. He could see the deep blue of the ocean through a transparent barrier above and around himself. "Wait, this isn't my destination. Where am I?" he tried to say, but instead of words leaving his mouth, all he could do was gasping and starting to feel dizzy and in need of water. One of the merpeople screeched something, and the wizard shaked his head in worry. "Yeah, Iwek, that's Gillyweed. Poor chap didn't listen to our people on the other end. Vingarduum Leviasa." With the spell, he lifted the choking centaur from the ground and shoved him through the nearest airlock, out into the sea. Two of the merpeople, one wearing only a red armband with a symbol, the other in oath-taker uniform and a blindfold, followed their guest out. Once outside, they could speak Gulliver that the centaur definitely understood. "You should have used the other Portkey," began one of them. The centaur cast a questioning glance at him. "Our wizards have recently installed a second Portkey system and modified the ancient one to increase security. Any incoming Portkey is halted at our apparition barrier, and we've built border stations where we can inspect our guests to make sure no threats are smuggled unknowingly or knowingly into Rock-to-Rattle. Then the travelers are allowed to apparate into the city or Portkey on to the original destination, under the council chamber. The underwater Portkeys lead to underwater stations, while newly installed ones in air-filled places lead to air-filled stations. There's lots of signs, and our people there will tell you. I guess you were in such a hurry that you didn't read or listen, swam into an airy one, and thought that you should eat gillyweed before starting because you'd arrive underwater." The centaur nodded. He didn't even try to speak. He felt his vocal cords were not where they used to be, displaced by gills. The merman noticed it. "So, you're really new to this, aren't you? Didn't they teach you to speak underwater?" "It's not that difficult. You still have vocal cords. You just have to move your gills in a certain way when you speak, and you'll sound somewhat like us, just not so nice. Watch and learn. Observing and mimicking, the centaur spoke for the first time. Urgent. News to your leaders. Let me pass. Right. You have already passed one of the inspections, as there is a clicking Muggle machine in there. As long as it doesn't click more frequently, you've cleared it, or so I'm told. Now, seeing you don't have any clothes or luggage, we would only normally need a wizard to do his soul detect spell when you touch the ingoing portkey in that building. Read it this time, because the other one takes you back to the sea near Howihamland. He gestured to a simple but big stone building with just one door. But with my blindfolded friend here, even that is unnecessary. You're clear to go, messenger. Once the centaur left, the merman wearing the armband turned to the other one. Tony, don't you find it strange that, when it's your turn of border duty, you are always placed here to the Howihamland keys? And when it isn't you, it's always someone with a magical eye, most of the time at both stations, as if constantly watching out for infiltrators. I mean, geez, what did the centaurs do? Stage a coup against the eldest? I don't know, read 7, and even if I knew, it would most likely be classified. For now, I'm just trying to enjoy spending time with my former squadmates. But I wonder why this fellow was in such a hurry. Chapter 297. Wizards Take Muggles' Jobs. Thursday, July 25, 1996, Presidential Palace, Howihamland. President Nihim's jaw dropped when he saw the shattered pieces of the protector lying on the floor. Oh, crap. That can't be good. His aide chuckled. You're telling me? Fortunately, sir, we were able to neutralize the saboteur. It appears that he was a previously unknown member of 2 Exceeds 4, and he had a hell of a lot of code lists on him. He was also a member of the cleaning staff here at the Golden House. Nihim whistled. Inside job. I need to do more background checks on the yahoos I hire. Yes, sir. I've taken the liberty of launching an investigation into all human resistance activity. If there's anything else planned, we're going to want to know about it. Good idea, Minister. How has the world reacted now that we're visible? The aide smiled. Believe it or not, we may be able to cover most of this up. The first reports came in from Muggle aircraft flying over the island, several hours from the mainland, and with limited means of communication with the rest of the Muggle world. The Gulliver Consortium and Atlantis managed to find out well before the people on the aircraft were able to get the word out, and Dagger has ordered an immediate gag order on information on our existence. That's all well and good, Minister, but you can't miss a landmass the size of Alaska, which just appeared out of nowhere. True, sir. However, it's buying us time. If all else fails, Dagger is going to report that, yes, this land exists, but it is designed as a wizard sanctuary off-limits to Muggles. That will explain why no one knew about it before, and it will prevent curious Muggles from coming over and possibly being enslaved, an event which would trigger a political firestorm. Nihim nodded. That's good, better than I had expected, in fact. Indeed, sir. However, there is a complication. You remember those areas not covered by the protector because they're surrounded by rivers, the ones blocked off by those guards, red fences, and death zones? Yes, what about them? Well, the death zones disappeared when the protector fell. Nihim's eyes bulged. You mean we're going to have our yahoos escaping to Muggle lands? I doubt they're going to come back if that happens. It's worse than that, sir. We've got a situation developing in the enclave known to Muggles as Huka Island, where 2 of the villages have made contact with us. Rach, in charge of the Hain part of the border, has managed to get simple trade going with the natives while warning the Muggles to stay off our land. That seems to have been a pretty peaceful encounter. However, he managed to attract the attention of the Vapey border guards as well, a few kilometers away. The Vapey fellows stopped by to see what was going on, leaving one person on guard. That guard was promptly overrun by yahoos trying to escape, and no fewer than 500 set up in Vapey. They're refusing to go back, and are trying to tell the locals what we've been doing. The aide chuckled. The 2 sides are dealing with a nasty language barrier. However, they've got a few people there who speak English, primarily at the cruise port in Vapey and the airport in Hain. That's close enough to Gulliver that the Yahoos can get their message across. You have to remember that both of these Muggle sites are on the same island, from their perspective, and pretty close together. Nihim winced. How has the government there responded? The government is confused, sir. The citizens of Hain are seeing us as a peaceful people, and those on the Vapey side are seeing us as slaveholders. They're trying to figure out what the hell is going on as well, and where they're going to put all these extra people. The population of that island, after all, was only about 600 to begin with, so it's now almost half Yahoos. They're also demanding to figure out where all this rain came from. They've never seen any of that before. Rach apparently has called for our people to send over temporary housing, just in case. The president turned to Hnam, who had apparated back into the room. Well, Hnam, you're the wizard. You know what's going on here with the rain, and how are we going to fix this? Hnam shrugged. Mr. President, I suspect the rain is a side effect of the deactivation of the protector. All of that water the Muggles had been seeing had to go somewhere, and I suspect it went into the atmosphere only to rain down on us again. If that's the case, it should slow Muggle tourism for a while and buy us more time. Nihim grunted and pointed out the window. How long is this going to last, Hnam? Judging from the amount of water we displaced, a good month or so at least. Great, I hate rain. What about the protector? Can you repair it? Hnam shook his head. No, Mr. President, I'm afraid not. That was installed by Atlantis, and you'll have to go through Dagher to get that reinstalled. Given the crisis with the Philosopher's Stone and the fact that we had a judgment day a month ago, he may be a bit busy. All right, let's try Plan B. How do you see this unfolding? Hnam looked at his front feet. I don't know, sir. I honestly don't know. All I'd recommend that we do is give Rach official ambassadorial powers, make him the point man, and make sure that nothing and nobody gets off that island. Huntsville, TX. Teresa Crowell stared at her manager in disbelief. What? You can't lay me off. I've been here for years. The manager shrugged. To be honest, Teresa, I didn't like the idea myself. Unfortunately, we're in a major economic crisis here, and we have to cut costs. The simple fact is that the WSC fellow here can do the work of 3 people simultaneously via magic at only double the price. That's a 33% cost savings. I'm sorry, Teresa, but I'll be sure to put in a good word for you if you need any references for a future job. Both Teresa and the manager were silent for a few seconds when they realized they were thinking the same thing. Was there actually anyone else hiring Enfield? Travis Radner dismissed the patroness and swore. It was time to talk to Clinton again. Harold Green had hired a new wizard, this time a Ukrainian. What's more, the fellow had created a new stone and on the verge of producing more elixir of life. Hendrickson, of course, was nowhere to be found. For all Radner knew, the fugitive wizard was selling his stone to the highest bidder. There were now 2 stones. Radner had a bad feeling there would soon be even more. The United States government had to organize an operation to capture and destroy that stone, or at least allow it to only be used as a cure for cancer. It was time to bring out the Special Operations Playbook. Joint Zelenderachterrattle, trading Postkodiak Island. Ambassador Zeke heard the distinctive crack of incoming apparition faintly in the distance, followed by the sound of numerous metal feet ruthlessly pounding the ground. Exiting his newly finished office complete with a magically illuminated underwater recreation room in the basement, he came face to face with the source of the noise, a drider that skidded to a halt at the door, barely missing him. Unlike the plain chrome and black prototypes he arrived with, this walker was covered in ornately engraved gold plates, with many precious gems inserted into various parts of the armor suit. The machine's humanoid upper half was formed like an attractive female's idealized torso and face, and a slightly glowing glyph hanging from her neck identified her as the eldest's aide. Regaining his calm, the ambassador greeted his unexpected guest. "Is that you, Senya? What a fine vehicle you have. Am I right it's custom-made just for you?" The mermaid's familiar screeching interrupted his pleasantries. "There's no time for this, ambassador. We must speak privately." Zeke led her back into the building, leaving the door open for a moment to allow the wizard who brought her here to catch up. Looking around inside, she nodded to the wizard, who began to cast spells and waving around magical detectors. Satisfied with what he found, he finally said, "We are alone." Senya opened a concealed control panel in one of her Drider's bracers and flipped a switch. Her mask retracted, the machine spider's thorax visibly dilated as the water inside was circulated there, and the suit's plates gradually moved apart to allow her crawl out at the front. The walker remained in standby mode, with the first legs bending and the upper body plates aligned near the spine to allow easy entrance for the pilot. Stretching her body, she dropped the conversational bomb. Howian Himlin's protector is destroyed by Yahoo rebels with no hope of repair for weeks, possibly months. The breach appears to be contained for now, but the Yahoos will no doubt try to make it worse. What's more, a small island of Muggles is now in the middle of Howian Himland. For now, this is highly classified, which means none of you should answer any questions about centaurs. As the surfacers say, we wash our hands. Zeke remained silent for a minute, thinking this through. Finally, he spoke. "This will get nasty when the Yahoos get aid from the Muggles. Worse, it can aggravate the Siadani situation if the Vila or some abolitionist fool go for their protector. The centaurs have a fresh start, can live without their Yahoos, and may yet talk themselves out of the worst of this, but the Siadani don't. If their protector fails..." The aide paled. Game over. They would stand before the world to be judged, deemed unworthy and torn apart lest they release their slaves at once. And doing so, they'd tear themselves apart. Let's just hope they can protect their protector. "May their guards help them all," agreed the ambassador. "I'll pass the word down. Now, if there isn't anything else, I have most curious news for you. It seems some Muggles not only kill dolphins, but also hold them in captivity." Yeah, I made that face too when I heard of it first. But it gets better. These so-called dolphinariums are quite strictly regulated nowadays, and they treat them well there. Most of them are born there, and having never known freedom, they can't miss it, at least the Muggles say so. So the Muggles are no better than the centaurs, enslaving other beings. How can they be such hypocrites? And just what they use them for, a dolphin in a small pond. Pointless, isn't it? "Oh, it gets better," explained Zeke. "They don't even know that dolphins are not simply beasts. They see them as intelligent, graceful, and entertaining animals, watching them play. But I also heard some dolphins are actually employed by their military. Their researchers are still in the process of understanding them and aren't quick to make progress. Recently, they contacted me and asked some questions about dolphins and our transformations. I shall visit them someday soon to clear this up." "Very well, Ambassador. May the ancestors help you bring understanding to the Muggles." Nestora, Republic of Nestor. She tried to settle down and live a peaceful, honest, risk-avoiding life. She really tried. After her misadventures in Roctorattle, Meatil Trapania returned to her family's home in the capital of Nestor with no intention of leaving any time soon. Even without being a truly skilled witch, she could have found employment, not to mention she had more than enough galleons now to pay for quickspell courses, should she decide to improve her meager magical skills. But in less than a week, she became more and more fed up with the things that made her leave in the first place. The spineless sorry excuses of males, groveling before every woman they saw. The hypocrisy of her fellow Vila, saying that any manner of humiliation, perversion, or exploitation inflicted upon a male is all right as long as they are in control, because they can have the males obliviated anyway if they go too far. The constant warmongering against Círdan, with everyone eager to spill blood, break bone, and burn flesh over a feud so ancient, they could hardly remember its original cause. Perhaps it was just her rebellious, adventure-seeking nature that made her see things that way. Perhaps if she hadn't met that Ciudadani exile, she would have overcame her temptations in time and would have remained with her mother and sisters. But with the wizard's letter in her pocket, she felt the call of adventure once again and suddenly decided to just go with it. Running up to her room, she hopped down at her table and began to write a response for the letter. I've read your proposal, and I agree wholeheartedly. I heard nothing about my people contemplating the deactivation of our protector, but it doesn't mean they aren't curious about Muggle wares. I understand your decision about weapons trade. I wouldn't expect you to lend a hand to Nestor's preparations for war. The only thing I ask in return is that you won't sell Muggle arms to Círdan either, should they ever revoke your banishment. Thinking about it, we shouldn't deal with weapons at all. We both have enough money, and thanks to you, good luck, to make this a perfectly legitimate business and still profit from it. I, for one, would prefer if we hadn't made any more enemies. Being imprisoned and drugged once has already been enough for one lifetime. Your plan for getting me to Kodiak sounds brave and even romantic, but I suggest a more appropriate rendezvous point. Coming this near to Nestor's shore will risk you being blown out of the sky. Instead, let's meet 5 days from now, on the 30th, over the summit of the Pico do Fogo. It's the highest peak in the Cape Verde archipelago, within flying distance from Nestor. With both of us approaching it from the air, we can't miss it. It's been too long since we last talked. I look forward to seeing you again. Rereading the letter to make sure she didn't forget something, she put it into an envelope, sealed it, and whistled. A moment later, a seagull appeared in the window. She tied the envelope to the bird's leg and watched the critter fly away. When it became a small white speckle on the eastern horizon, then disappeared altogether, she finally turned away and started to make preparations for her next great adventure. Chapter 298. Atlanta Olympic Bombing Prevented. Friday, July 26, 1996, Ocala National Forest, Facility Ocala, National Forest, Florida, United States of America. Aura Dorothy Weathers listened as Kenneth Franco's delivered his final orders to the strike team. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We know where he is and what he's trying to do, and we're going to apparate in and catch him. I've just gotten ourselves a search warrant so we can go in without worrying about breaking the law. Weathers nodded. This should be a particularly easy case, primarily because the target was going to be a Muggle. Franco then spoke with a combination of both alarm and pride. Fellow Auras, I must be frank. Had it not been for the fall of the Statute of Secrecy, it is unlikely that the federal government would have received enough information to track this man down in time. This could have been a disaster, especially if he took out several foreign athletes with that homemade contraption of his. Weathers couldn't agree with him more. Although the plans supposedly involved detonating the device in the stands, he could have always changed them at the last minute, particularly if he realized the government was onto him. The head of the Ocala National Forest facility looked around one last time. Well, this is it then. It is currently 9:53 a.m., and he is still at home right now. As soon as that clock hits 10:00, go and grab him. We can't wait any longer, as we suspect that he's going to do the deed tomorrow. Good luck. 7 minutes later, Weathers turned on the spot and apparated to a small apartment in the greater Atlanta area. By good fortune, she found herself facing the target, a 30-year-old man whose back was to her. He was surrounded by bomb-making paraphernalia and several devices, which looked ready to go. She pointed her wand at the man, cast a Protego spell upon her and the rest of the attack party, and shouted, "Freeze." The terrorist jumped 2 feet in the air and started to turn around. He looked frantically for something to defend himself with, but a quick Expelliarmus tossed a bunch of keys out of his hand. Keys could be a dangerous missile weapon, especially if they hit the enemy in the eyes. One of Weathers's colleagues hit the man with an impedimenta jinx, and he toppled to the floor. Officers promptly started issuing him his Miranda rights and started reading him the riot act. Eric Robert Rudolph, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit terrorism. You have the right to remain silent. Not surprisingly, Rudolph remained silent. He was likely still in shock from being apprehended by people just teleporting into his apartment. United States Senate. The senator from Arizona had the floor. Rumors had been circulating that he was going to recommend a very revolutionary and controversial new idea. No one knew, however, what it was going to be. The man had kept it very close to his vest. Well, the senators wouldn't have to wait much longer. They held their breath as he began his speech. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I would like to propose a new amendment to the Constitution which allows citizens to elect presidential cabinet members directly, rather than having the president appoint them himself. I admit that this is a most unusual request. However, it makes sense for one very good reason. Members of the Senate, we have a precedent for this. As you are undoubtedly aware by now, the Wizards elect Travis Radner directly by a simple election. Although we all know him as the Secretary of Magic, the fact remains that he is technically a member of the President's cabinet, right up there with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense. If American citizens have the right to vote for who becomes president, why should they not be awarded the right to vote for his advisors? Enfield. Ma. Cameras flashed as Persephone Ariadne addressed the media. It is my duty as Deputy Secretary of Magic to announce that the Geminio charm has been tabooed. What this means is that if anyone tries to cast the Geminio charm in the United States or its territories, the Department of Magic will find out immediately and track him or her down. I know that this seems like a case of the government trying to spy on its citizens. However, let me explain what is going on here. Although technically a neutral spell, the Geminio charm does not care about what exactly it duplicates. It can be used to duplicate keys and documents, which is good. Unfortunately, the events of Judgment Day also demonstrate what can happen with the Geminio charm is used for malicious purposes. This new initiative has been made necessary by a disturbing new use of magic to commit crimes. We have reason to believe that the Geminio charm has been used to print counterfeit money, which will pass as genuine by even the most sophisticated bureau of engraving and printing detectors. All the perpetrator needs is $1 bill. The Geminio charm can be used to duplicate that dollar bill as many times as the criminal sees fit. Needless to say, that must be stopped to keep the dollar solvent. We are working with other magical authorities to ensure that the American dollar becomes as resistant to counterfeiting as the galleon, the standard unit of currency in the wizarding world. The prohibition of the Geminio charm will stay in place until a more permanent method is developed to modify dollar bills so that they can no longer be duplicated. Once that is in place, the taboo will be lifted. Thank you for your attention, St. Peter's Basilica. Samuel looked troubled. You're thinking of modifying the text of Genesis to insert the Noah-Pishtin text and the story of Noah between the two tales of creation. John Paul nodded. Yes, Holy One. Unless I'm mistaken, we are correcting a mistake that's been there ever since shortly after the hammer of Ra hit. It fits the chronology much better, and as you have seen, we now have physical evidence for the existence of the impact. Urban Roman 9 snorted, and everyone glared at him. Although he was increasingly convinced that Samuel knew what he was talking about, he was still reluctant to do anything major to the text of the Bible. Samuel winced. This does not seem right, John Paul. It goes against everything I believe in. Changing the text of the Bible seems dangerous. John Paul spoke quickly. We're not changing the content, Holy One. We're just moving things around to fit the historical record better. Everything you know about will still be the same, albeit in a different order. The only thing which will be added will be the Noah-Pishtin story, and that will be inserted as an additional flood story after Noah. Samuel thought for a second. You know, you may have a point. You're sure Noah-Pishtin was Noah, right? Suleiman nodded. Yes, Holy One, we are absolutely sure about that now. In that case, how about lengthening the Noah story to include everything Noah-Pishtin says as well, but in this case, attribute it to Noah? The Bible must always tell the truth, and according to this evidence, Noah did in fact do these things. You can even include a more detailed description of the event triggering the flood. God choosing to send a tremendous rock down from the sky to strike the ground. Call it the hammer of God instead of hammer of Ra, however. John Paul's eyebrows shot up. That actually wasn't a bad idea, 5-tree plantation Searden. Altry's widow looked in amazement at the new contraption. What a wonder! It works, and it only needs one person to operate it. The American wizard beamed. Yes, Mrs. Altry. This Muggle device is called a tractor, and it can do the work of 10 men in a much shorter period of time. We will convert it to run off magic if you wish. With a device such as this, you can emancipate 9 people and have the 10th become a specialist, which can earn him a lot of money driving tractors. Altry's widow nodded. I like this, sir. I like this a lot. Chapter 299. A Stone for Rasputin. Monday, July 29, 1996, Herald Green Pharmaceutical Company, Charleston, United States of America. It was 3:00 a.m. The janitors had gone home, and the security guard was starting to doze off. Just to be certain, however, Dmitri Vasiliev hit him with a sleep spell and watched in satisfaction as his head fell on his console. Vasiliev was amused when he saw the screen printing out "ah." He figured he had maybe an hour at most before the early birds started to come in. With all of the work surrounding the Philosopher's Stone, people were working long hours. Although the vast majority of people still worked 8 to 6 or thereabouts, he couldn't risk underestimating how early people would come in. Noticing that the coast was clear, he apparated over to his accomplice's hideout. He wasn't allowed to actually bring the original stone outside the building, nor was he allowed to bring any of the notes. Green had thought of that unbreakable oath shortly after Vasiliev had sworn the first set. He tapped Igor Larinov on the shoulder. Well, old friend, everything is all set. You're sure you're up to the task? I've got the instructions all ready, but I must warn you that they're pretty complicated. It took me 45 minutes to make the one that's already in the building, and I'm a master alchemist. You think you can do it? Larinov shuddered. I hope so, Dmitri. Rasputin told me that if I don't, he's going to do to me what the Romanovs tried to do to him, draw and quarter me, behead me, that type of stuff. I'm very motivated to do this. Hopefully, I'll be able to convince Kashe to make me primary disciple, which will in turn allow me to order that Rasputin be killed. Vasiliev grinned. I must admit, Rasputin is a bit strange. However, he's the only person able to bring Kashe back, so we're going to have to deal with him. Here, grab onto my hand, and I'll bring you back to the lab via side-along apparition. Larinov grabbed hold of him, and Vasiliev transported both of them to the lab. Larinov looked around the room and whistled. Impressive setup you've got here. Where'd you get all that material for the second stone? Most of it came from leftover spell components from previous 2 stones. I was able to Geminio stuff, which I'd run out of before the spell got tabooed. Thankfully, none of those limiting reagents were magical. Here are the instructions, Igor. I've disabled the security camera for the time being, and since the guard is asleep, he won't notice anything. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Larinov rolled up his sleeves, looked at the instructions, and frowned. Ah, Dmitri, you do realize I don't know English. Next time, can you please translate this stuff into Russian? Vasiliev slapped the palm of his hand against his head. Great work, Dmitri. Very good. All right, give me the book back. I'll tell you what to do. First, I highly recommend that you take 25 ounces of that liquid injera. The work went pretty quickly, with Vasilev phrasing his instructions as suggestions to get around the oath that he not actually make a new stone. 1 hour later, the second stone was finished. It was only about the size of an acorn, and as a result, it wouldn't be able to provide as much of the elixir of life as Hendrickson's, Flamel's, or Vasilev's. However, that wasn't a problem. When you lived forever, waiting a few extra days to get your elixir wouldn't be an issue. Laranov tested the new stone on a cut on his finger. Watching the cut heal completely, he nodded and Fidelius the stone to himself. Vasilev congratulated him, grabbed 2 cokes from a vending machine, and raised a toast to the black guard T. Chernobog. The 2 cultists then left the building and returned to the hideout. Laranov was about return to his normal civilian job when something occurred to him. Turning to Vasilev, he asked, "Dmitri, is it true that when Kashe comes back, he'll be the avatar of the Black God himself?" Vasilev shrugged. "I don't know, Igor. However, given the amazing things I've heard of this man, I wouldn't be surprised." 6 hours later, Vasilev was called into Mr. Green's office by a very troubled Mr. Green. Vasilev's heart leapt into his throat. Had his early morning escapades been detected? He couldn't see how he'd planned everything perfectly. Trying to stay calm, he walked into the office and shook Green's hand. "Good morning, Mr. Green. How are you?" Green shook his head and handed him a folder. "We've got a problem, Dmitri. Read this." Frowning, Vasilev looked at the folder. He read the first couple of pages, and his eyes widened. Radner and this Franco fellow have managed to convince the state of South Carolina to issue a cease and desist order against production of the elixir of life. It appears so, Dmitri. I can't imagine how they think they're going to be able to get away with this. I can understand them being paranoid about the possibility of eternal life. They don't realize what good it can do for the world, and they probably see it as a threat to their own high-ranking positions in the American wizarding world. However, they must realize that all we're going to do is say we're going to produce a cure for cancer, and that's it. We can't control how the elixir is used. Vasilev shook his head. What exactly are they doing? Stalling for time until they figure out how the hell they're going to handle this. If they're stalling for time, it's not working. Franco, the head of the Ocala National Forest branch of the American Department of Magic, which oversees South Carolina and Charleston, can't seem to figure out who's supposed to try the case, the regional wizarding courts or the normal Muggle court system. The Baseball League protocol isn't really clear here, as the case involves use of a powerful magical artifact by Muggles. Franco claims the stone's magical use means a wizarding trial is necessary, and the state claims that our status as a public company means a Muggle trial is necessary. For all we know, they're going to try to sue us in both courts. That's going to slow down their proceedings a bit and probably take a lot out of their paychecks. Lawyers are expensive, you know. Green grinned. Not unless you're getting gold virtually for free. If I were them, I'd settle on one court system and have the leader of the other side serve as a witness or consultant. I see. Upon which grounds are they basing this lawsuit? More or less what we expected, Dmitri. Mankind isn't wise enough to deserve the elixir of life. Even if we did use it to cure cancer, people would abuse it and make themselves immortal. Vasilev chuckled. Let me guess, Dr. Flamel is probably going to testify as well. Green grinned. I sure hope so, Dmitri. I know exactly what I'm going to say to him. Really, what's that? Simple. If you think mankind isn't wise enough to deserve the elixir of life, why did you hold on to it for 600 years? Trust me, Dmitri, there's no way they're going to win this. Both men laughed at that. Vasilev, however, couldn't help but think the worst. What happens if they do rule against us and force us to destroy the stone? What next? Green shrugged. Hunt down Hendrickson and recover our stolen property. You're a wizard working for us, so things may have just gotten a hell of a lot easier. Chapter 300. Rasputin covets the Elder Wand. Tuesday, July 30, 1996, somewhere Ukraine Grigory Rasputin had liked the way things were going. And that was before he had reviewed some of the most recent news and discovered that Albus Dumbledore had temporarily left the protection of Hogwarts to chase Hendrickson as part of Dumbledore's army. Very interesting. Professor Dumbledore was the master of the Elder Wand, and that made him virtually unassailable by magical weapons. However, Rasputin had worked with both Muggles and wizards in the teens. He had a strong suspicion that the Elder Wand wouldn't do much good against a ranged Muggle weapon, like a bomb, missile, or bullet. Yes, Voldemort had been shot by Sirius Black, while the Dark Lord had been holding the Elder Wand. However, that didn't really prove much, as Voldemort had not been the master of the wand at the time he was killed. Rasputin knew all about the Elder Wand, of course. Mastery of the Elder Wand was transferred by the death or defeat of the previous master, and in the hands of its master, the Elder Wand could perform magic which would have normally been considered impossible. The legend said that Death himself actually created the wand, though Rasputin didn't buy that. All he knew is that the Elder Wand was the most powerful wand in the world and could defeat any other wand in a duel. The Elder Wand could come in handy when he brought back Kashé. Needless to say, there would likely be a fight to see who would become Kashé's new primary disciple. Having the Elder Wand at a time like that could come in quite handy and make sure that he, Rasputin, came out on top. For defense, Rasputin planned to rely on the Philosopher's Stone. Igor Laranov had just delivered the stone to him, and Rasputin had thanked him profusely. Unfortunately, Laranov hadn't gotten much of a chance to enjoy his new status, as an unexpected wind gust had knocked a utility pole hosting an electrical transformer into the lake Igor had been swimming in. The resulting 20,000 volts, or whatever it had been, had done its job, and now Rasputin was one of the secret keepers for the stone. Rasputin went over in his mind what would be necessary to bring back Kashé. The ritual was ancient, of course. It had to be performed during the 12 days of Christmas between the Catholic and Orthodox holidays. The mad monk figured he'd do it in the early morning hours of New Year's Day or thereabouts, when everyone else was going to sleep and distracted by all the fireworks. Wizard and former professional physician Boris Maximovich Kashé had ingratiated himself to the leaders of a small Russian princedom shortly before the Black Death. This had put him in a position of wealth and power, and in return he provided them with a spell which would protect them from his enhanced bubonic plague. Eventually, though, the plague had gotten out of control, with Atlantis at DEFCON 1 and Grand Mugwump Zerin's agents running all over the place. Kashé's benefactors had had no choice but to turn him in. However, they offered him a deal. Since he had a Horcrux, they'd help him construct a ritual which would allow the primary advisor to the ruler of the principality to bring him back as a possible ally in case he was needed in the future. Kashé had agreed to this and gone to his incapacitation, knowing that he could be brought back. The problem was that in the chaos after the Black Death, everyone had forgotten about him, and for the most part, the surviving advisors were Muggles who wouldn't be able to perform the rituals. Yet the enchantment was still there, passing from advisory council to advisory council. As time went by, the principality was taken over by St. Petersburg, so the people responsible for bringing Kashé back became those associated with the Tsars. The last Tsar was Nicholas Roman II. Rasputin, a fellow Black Guard cultist, had found out about the enchantment and managed to maneuver himself into a position of power to bring back Kashé. Someone like Kashé could really have had fun with the First World War. Of course, Rasputin had been incapacitated before he could perform the ritual, so that hadn't worked out as he had intended. This time, however, he'd get the job done. He realized he'd have to gain control of the Elder Wand and the Philosopher's Stone before Kashé came back, and everyone started fighting for primary disciple status. He had just acquired the stone. However, he still needed the wand. The plan was simple. Albus Dumbledore was going to die, and Rasputin was going to make it look like an accident or frame somebody else for it. And if Rasputin used an intermediary, he'd disarm the accomplice without telling him what it was for Ziggurat Labs. Michael Parson had asked Fergie, Diana, and the king to return to his lab. He needed to tell them this in person, and without the paparazzi to spread the news prematurely. Parson could tell that the Queen Mother had realized immediately what had happened as soon as William had picked that wand up. Parson had as well, of course, but just prayed that it was a fluke. It turned out that it wasn't a fluke. What's more, there had been a second surprise which, in retrospect, shouldn't have been a surprise given the way the world had reacted to the woman in the first place. The doctor bowed to the royals and began his report. "Your Majesty, I've got the results of the genetic testing for you and your family. The results are most intriguing." He turned to Sarah Ferguson. "Your Highness, you seem to be a Muggle, which is more or less what we expected. You don't seem to have any of the unusual genes. Don't worry, however, that's like 98% of the rest of the people on this planet, including Prime Minister Heseltine." Fergie nodded. "Makes sense." He then turned to Diana. "Princess, you appear to have the V complex, the one associated with Velar ancestry." Diana's eyebrows shot up. "I'm a Velar." "Unlikely, Princess. However, the wizards tell me that this complex tends to be rather dominant. For all we know, you could be 164 Velar, and it was still passed down. You may not even know your Velar ancestor." Fergie chuckled. "I must say, Dee, it would explain why everyone's been gawking at you all these years, and how you managed to be so charismatic." Diana glared at her. "Thank you, Fergie. I really needed that." She turned back to the parson. "Am I sick? Do I have to take pills for it?" Parson laughed. "No, Princess. The presence of the V complex is absolutely harmless unless the person is 1/4 Velar or more, in which case she can charm men." He grunted as Parson turned to the king. This was the interesting and disturbing case. "Your Majesty, you also have the V complex. Given the fact that V tends to be dominant, it's not surprising that your mother passed it on to you. In theory, it would allow you to attract women. However, there isn't much information as to how Velar genes work with men." The king's eyes widened for a moment, but he nodded. "All right, fair enough. Like you said, it's harmless, and it could be useful as a pickup line for girls when I get older." Parson laughed for a moment, but his face grew serious again. "That's not all, however. Your Highness, we double-checked this several times, and the results all came out the same." He paused for effect. "Your Majesty, you've got the Q complex. If our theories are correct, and they appear to be holding up to this point, this means that you have latent wizarding abilities. You have the ability to cast spells under certain circumstances. We suspected this from the beginning, as soon as you were able to pick up the wand without being harmed. Only beings with the Q complex can touch wands." Fergie swore and Diana blinked. No one spoke for a few minutes. Finally, Diana rolled her eyes. At least Charles gave him something useful. Fergie snorted as the king, wide-eyed, began to speak. "Are you telling me, Dr. Parson, that I'm a wizard?" "Quite possibly, Your Majesty. Minister of Magic Flamel, who has been around for a long time, suspects that people with Q and no Z may be able to attend Hogwarts, provided that they work under close supervision." William reeled back. "I can go to Hogwarts with Hermione Granger. Wow, Mom, can I? I'm brave. I can handle it." Diana ignored him and remained focused on the doctor. "If he has magical abilities, how come no one knew about this? Come to think of it, how come I didn't know I had Velar genes?" Parson shrugged. "The wizarding community likely had no idea about genes and advanced biology prior to the fall of the Statute of Secrecy. Their wizarding tests probably looked for signs that candidates had both Q and Z activated, which would cause people like His Majesty to be seen as Muggles, a false negative. Is it possible for someone to have the Z complex and not the Q? Yes, Princess. We found several people like that. These include, among others, Harry Potter's cousin Dudley Dursley and Hogwarts instructor Argus Filch. Fergie frowned. How could someone unable to cast spells work at Hogwarts? Professor Filch is familiar with the magical world, having been raised in the wizarding community, and is in a position where he does not need to use magic. He is likely a case where a freak mutation deactivated the Z gene in a case where both parents had QZ. The net result is a wizard with unusually limited magical abilities, generally known as a squib. Had His Majesty been raised in the wizarding world, he would likely have been considered a squib and not a muggle. Squibs without Z can cast spells but have trouble seeing magical fields. Squibs without Q can see ghosts and other magical entities, but not cast spells. Realization dawned on Diana's face. Let me guess. Those haunted house stories were actually sightings of real ghosts by Z-only squibs, but the vast majority of people don't see the ghosts not because the ghosts don't exist, but because they lack the Z. Most likely, Princess. Diana thought for a moment. Do you know of any cases where Q-only squibs were taught to cast spells? Parsons nodded. I believe so. Flamel claims Dialanis mentioned a case in South Korea where a man was being trained as a wizard even though he was unable to see certain magical objects. That fits the description of a Q-only squib. William turned to his mother. Mom, can I go to Hogwarts this year? If I'm going to be king, I'll have to protect the United Kingdom from monsters and bad wizards. Only a wizard would be able to do that. Diana and Fergie stared at each other. Meanwhile, the doctor picked up the wand used for the test with tongs and placed it in William's hands. Your Majesty, I think this is yours. Huntsville, TX. Teresa Crowell left the lawyer's office convinced that she had a case. She was going to get her job back from that WSC usurper. Although WSC people deserved jobs, they shouldn't be taking jobs from Muggles. WSC should be handling wizard work, while Muggles should be handling Muggle work. She started filling out the appropriate paperwork. Francisco Mendes International Airport Praia, Republic of Cape Verde. Liges Tello Saldivar, air traffic controller, swore viciously, then shouted to one of his colleagues, Alvaro, it's not adjusting course. Get back to that at radio now. Alvaro Guzman sounded equally despaired. It's no use. I've tried every frequency in several languages, but I still got no response. Whatever it is, it's gonna cross over us in under a minute. Do you get a visual? Liges looked at the radar and realized that indeed, even a decent-sized bird should be visible to the naked eye by now. Yet, when he looked out to the east, all he could see was the pristine weather and a flock of birds in the distance. Thinking that it may be the birds, he reached for his binoculars but couldn't find them. Realizing that they were borrowed by some of their friends, he decided to do the next best thing anything with a zoom setting. Hey, that's my camera, man, shouted Alvaro. Give it back. Chill, I only borrowed it for a minute, said Liges, then turned the device on and eastwards and looked at the display. Then he rubbed his eyes, looked without the camera, then again with the camera, suddenly paling, then swallowing and uttering something like, oh boy. We've got an infiltrator. Call the Coast Guard or the Wizards or anyone. Now. Cape Verde Airpsace, 1 mile east of Praia. Samana Nastheros swore viciously. Up to this point, his journey was comfortably boring. He apparated to Seychelles, where he promptly bought the first Muggle fishing boat that looked younger than 20 years. Enchanting it to fly had been child's play, and figuring that he would fly over Africa in a straight line, he thought he didn't need to do more than reaching the desired altitude, 1,000 feet, start flying in the right direction, west-northwest, and keep accelerating. The boat started shaking at 180 mph in clear weather. Luckily, he had the foresight to dial it back to 100 mph, not that he had any speedometers on board. There were some hiccups, naturally, but after splattering an unsuspecting vulture over the plains, he remembered to add a minor repulsing charm to the enchantments. He and Floppy took turns keeping watch, But nothing interesting happened after the bird crash, of course. If only they had brought a radio on board, they'd have known that half the continent's air traffic control and military have noticed them. Minutes away from their destination, he was already thinking about Myrtil in several very pleasant situations. Then, without warning, the boat lurched as a Muggle aircraft flew below them, way too close for comfort, prompting him to start shouting about shameful and debatably real aspects of respectable, historically significant wizards. Somehow regaining control of the boat, the wizard shakily looked back at the descending airplane, then seeing that it was still apparently unharmed, he resumed his course. The repulsing charms were commonly used by flying wizards to provide defense against birds and other flying objects, including other wizards. To keep both would-be colliders alive, they consisted of several fields on top of each other like an onion, each more powerful the closer the object got to the wizard's vehicle. Spell force and radius was directly proportional to the vehicle's speed. After hitting the vulture, Salmona put all the power he could in the enchantment. At his present speed of 100 mph, the spell's weakest outer layers extended over 100 meters forward and up to 25 meters around the boat. The Boeing 737, minutes away from landing, flew 23 meters below the boat. Thanks to its much greater weight, it wasn't significantly pushed off course. However, it was partially immersed into a magical field, which had immediate and very unpleasant effects on the electrics on board. Thanks to the pilot's skill, they still had a safe landing. At least the wheels were already out when the power was cut. Feet over the summit of Pico do Fogo, 30 minutes later. Myrtil lazily floated on a thermal, casting expectant glances to the east. For a minute now, her bird eyes could pick up an approaching object from there. Her boyfriend didn't tell what kind of vehicle he'll use, and she wanted to keep it a surprise. But now she started to have some bad feelings. She spotted several more objects closing in behind the first. On the other hand, Salmona couldn't be so foolish to neglect using concealing charms. Indeed, she could now see the shimmering of the magic field around the approaching boat. And quite a fine one, apparently. Calming herself, she began to match vectors with the slowing vehicle. One thing, however, bothered her. She'll be highly visible to the approaching Muggle vehicles. Then again, Muggles, seeing a Velar in her monstrous form, usually explained it away as it was a very big bird. And let's speak about something else, right? Swooping down, she jumped onto the boat just as it slowed to a hovering halt. She barely had enough time to drop her backpack and transform into human form before the Ciudadani ran to her and caught her in his embrace. Occupied in shameless kissing for several minutes, they were interrupted by the ever-increasing noise of rotor blades and Muggle loudspeakers growing to audible, then annoying volumes, followed by the panicked exclamation of the house elf. Master, mistress, Floppy is very sorry to interrupt, but these Muggles can somehow see us. That's not possible. No Muggle can see through a disillusionment charm. Their presence here is mere coincidence, it must be. But hey, what about you look around, check the island for anything interesting. We'll wait for you right here. Be back in an hour. He winked at the Velar or two. Huffing, the elf disapparated. The wizard turned to his beloved and asked her, Hey, have you ever done it 1,000 feet in the air, on a boat, in front of unsuspecting Muggles? Right on cue, 3 wizards sitting on brooms and pointing wands at them, auras judging by their clothing and very grumpy judging by the looks on their face, materialized around them and began yelling at them in Portuguese. Reluctantly pulling away from the Velar and slowly lifting his hands, Salmona found 2 words that amply expressed his feelings about the situation. Oh, crap.